Hello, Internet, and welcome to our podcast.
Where we talk about movies and pop culture, and despite 4 years of film school, what I don't know about movies and cinema will shock you.
I know too much. It puts me in real danger.
Tweet us and tell us what movies you'd like us to talk about on the Whiskey and Sweet Tea Show at The Wast Show. That's the W-A-S-T Show.
I'm Whiskey.
I'm Sweet Tea.
Let's do this. T, do you know what time it is?
I'm assuming, based on the fact that your glass is refilled, that it's time for Reels on the Rocks.
Reels on the Rocks.
Let's do this.
All right, so everybody, since this is our first episode, and you would have no idea of knowing this, we're going to review a movie every week. Once we get our Twitter active, you will actually be able to vote on whatever movie we are going to see for our next episode. Because
and it doesn't have to be a current movie either. It could be a past movie.
It could be anything you just want us to talk about. But
we have Blu-ray players, DVD players, and PS4s. We can watch anything.
I live in a box. But anyway, so this week's movie is the new Invisible Man. And we actually did something interesting for this first episode. We actually decided to watch the original before going into the new one. And I think it would be pertinent to just discuss that one very briefly.
First off, everybody, watch the original Invisible Man. It is. There are parts in it that you'll just be like, oh, this is dated, and it's kind of like funny, but at the same time, there's just something about it that's just inherently unsettling.
I was going to say, I don't know about pretty much it's kind of a absolute power corrupts absolutely story. It's been done before, even though it's an old movie.
Right, yeah.
The things that I took away from it, especially having not seen it in a very long time, is Claude Rains is hilarious. He is, I think, probably the most underrated mad scientist in any horror movie. Everyone talks about Frankenstein, but Frankenstein's only manic for like one scene.
Yeah, he's not. Yeah, Frankenstein's not. He's not really a character in Frankenstein.
There's the "It's alive." He does that once, and then he's like not crazy for most of the movie.
But if you really think about it, that's not worthy of having a movie named after you.
Claude Rains is off the rails for the entire movie, and it is the funniest thing ever. I feel like we both cracked up. There, like he's talking to his would-be assistant in the movie. And the first
before
thing
we go any
says,
further, spoilers are ahead. So if you want to watch either this movie or the new Invisible Man, pause this, watch, then come back and take another listen.
Absolutely. So what I will say, I don't think most current audiences would find the old one funny, but I think it's probably one of the more entertaining Universal horror movies. If you're just wanting to watch something and actually be, engaged and entertained, this is the one to go to, in my opinion. Every Universal horror movie kind of has some sort of... It's a horror movie in air quotations, but it's really something else. For Frankenstein,
I would say it's more of a thriller.
For this one, I'd say it's definitely a lot more comedic than any of the other ones. For The Mummy, it's a love story. For Frankenstein, it's very tragic. For Dracula, I don't, I get that one's pretty straightforward, I think. But anyway, like most Universal horror movies, there is sort of Creature of the Black Lagoon. I'd say is very
greatest love story ever.
Well, I'd say it's very like environmentalist. You've got these people coming in and ruining the Amazon, and they've got this monster. But for this one, it's the star of the movie is the Invisible Man. Claude Rains is really funny, and the other thing about it that. Honestly, I forgot how good the special effects were.
Yes, I was amazed.
It came out in 1933, and it's just constant. There's stuff being, moved on its own. There's like shots of him, with his face missing. It's
the fact they were able to get they have him. They're able to show him like unwrapping the bandages. Like no, that's not even like a cut. They show him and there's nothing under. You're not even watching it being like, oh, I can clearly see where they had a frame. No, it looks incredible.
It's very good, and this is like a film that came out before like The Wizard of Oz or stuff.
Yeah.
And fun fact, the sequel of all things actually did win an Academy Award for best special effects back in the day. So this is something that was actually really impressive at the time too.
It's so impressive.
I'd say so too. But the thing about it for me is the tone is kind of goofy. Like even when he's like killing off characters and stuff, there's just sort of this manic energy to it. Like it reminds me of like Brain from Pinky and the Brain, just like model. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there's a scene in the film where his would be assistant betrays him, and he kills him by like pushing him off a cliff in a car, and just the way
It's so over the top.
It's
evil.
so silly. Like that's the thing.
Well,
I
here's
think at the time it probably was kind of scary to see this person who's essentially unstoppable. In modern times, the whole thing is pretty silly. Like even the fact he becomes invisible because he like drinks a magic potion, and it also makes him go insane, which we'll talk about regarding the current one. But it's a very dated concept. At the time, like when H.G. Wells wrote the novel and stuff, I'm sure it was very, like, oh, how scary. I think, based on modern sensibilities, it's more believable that someone would just kind of go power hungry, and I think that's more what the message of the original one was, even though it's like, oh, the potion made him go crazy. No, I think the message is like, when given absolute power, even the best men can become monsters. That's kind of the vibe I got from the original. So it's got a little bit of a tragic edge to it. And speaking of which, he has a love interest who's barely in the movie.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way they play it when they quote unquote kill him at the end. Of course, they don't really, because there's like 8 sequels, but. But like his love interest is like weeping over his dead body and stuff. And it's, I think, literally in the movie just so we can have sympathy for this megalomaniacal evil person, to be like, oh yeah, he was a good guy one time.
Well, and I think that's the symbolism at the end of the movie is when he becomes he dies and he's no longer invisible.
Yes, it's like
it's like no, that at the end of the day this was a person who was just corrupted by this ability. And to me, and I know you've described it as more you find more hilarious, more comedic. I think there are parts that are funny, like for example when he's scaring people by wearing only a shirt and just waving himself around,
skipping down the road in pants,
yes,
doing nursery rhymes.
Yes,
like
that's cute, but there's something about it that is just to me and I think that speaks to the power of the movie and how well it's made and how well it's told, is that I still find, even when I'm laughing at this pair of pants, there's something just still inherently unsettling about it. And it's just like, sometimes I think the things that are the scariest are things that, in the moment you're just like, oh, this is so funny, and then you think about it, but there's something nagging about it. You're just like, there's something that bothers me about this. And that's one of the things I really liked about this movie, is that they were able to do more of the as they were able to kind of, and whether or not it was intentional or not, or if it's just the way it's aged, they were able to kind of balance the two out to where you're laughing at the same time you're in the back of your mind like, oh my gosh, what is going on here?
For sure. But anyway, I definitely, if any of our listeners out there haven't seen the original, I would highly recommend it. If you're a little worried that maybe the older horror movies aren't scary enough or boring or something, I definitely say this is a good one to dip your toes into, because it's very entertaining, even if you don't find it scary. Just massively amazing, underrated performance from Claude Rains. Really impressive special effects for the 1930s. Like, if you're curious about Universal horror movies, this is probably the one to start with.
You know what's interesting about Claude Rains' performance in this is that even though we don't see him for most of the movie, and there's all we can see is the shape of his body when he's wearing clothes, is when we got to the end and when he dies and the effect wears off, that we see what the character, I guess, would have actually looked like. I remember thinking, no, that's not the Invisible Man. That guy looks too normal to be. No,
yeah,
it's like somehow in your mind you create an image of what the Invisible Man is, and then when we see it at the end, it's like, this isn't it, even though you didn't have anything to really go off of.
That is such a good point, because I thought, because I didn't remember what he looked like. And he's got such a distinctive voice in this movie that you think of like an older gentleman. You think of, and he's basically a hunk, guys. Like he's a pretty good looking dude, and it's so funny.
I don't know if I classify as hunk, but yeah, he's a good looking guy.
But it's so funny because I'd say maybe Disney Prince, maybe, I don't know. He was very,
I'll give you that
good looking.
like the Prince from Snow White.
Actually, that is an interesting parallel to draw with the next one, which we should get into. So, T, what did you think of the new Invisible Man?
I'm not sure if I was a fan yet or not.
Really?
I don't know. I was kind of disappointed, I guess. And I guess the best way I can describe it is interesting. And it's going to be kind of weird to describe it, but it's like the fact with the original is, and maybe this is like the whole thing with the original Invisible Man, you were scared of something that you could see that maybe because, of coding at the time and the way things could be shown in movies, a lot of the stuff didn't happen like on screen. And it's like, so you were more scared of what you couldn't see. What is the potential? And I guess in the new one, because you see what he does, I don't know, it had less of effect on me. I don't know.
I do think some of the scares were like ruined by the trailer that I'm sure most of you guys saw.
Yeah.
My take on it, first off, the reason I mentioned the love interest is because the characters are essentially kind of the same, except in this one, the protagonist is the love interest. I don't think they kept the names of any of the characters. I feel like I looked that up and none of them
I don't believe they did either.
But unlike the original film, our protagonist is a victim of abuse. It's actually very
sad.
Intense.
Yeah, it is intense. One scene you've seen of the abuse at the very beginning, just the fact that he broke the window with his fist trying to pull out of the car, that tells you everything you need to know about what this girl's been through.
So, my favorite genre, everybody, is horror. When I'm sipping back my whiskey, it's my favorite genre, and I honestly believe that if you aren't already a horror fan, the best kind of push towards that genre I could give you is that I feel like it is a genre that can really tackle some pretty gnarly aspects of everyday life, and I think it's something that can really
It's something. Horror is this thing that anybody can find themselves in.
You can take very relatable topics in everyday life that cause anxiety, or any sort of like uncomfortable sort of situation, and be able to express it
and I
through horror. And this honestly, I feel like this version of the Invisible Man, there is a little bit of political coding that I think especially with Me Too and stuff like that. This is a woman's story. And one thing I actually thought this is more of a fun fact, everybody, but I was curious if this had a female director. Unfortunately, it did not. But as a big horror fan, I do know the director. It's Leigh Whannell, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So any of you guys listening who have seen the Saw franchise, the director is actually the young photographer who's chained up in the first Saw film. He's gone on. He's still an actor, but he's gone on to direct some films. And I forget if it was last year or the year before, but he did that film Upgrade. That was his last film that he made. It's the one where the guy gets like a computer chip in his head. It was apparently very good. I didn't get a chance to see it.
I didn't get a chance.
So he's only directed 3 films. He's also he's a character in the Insidious movies. His name's Specs. It's funny, I've seen 2 of those movies and I don't even remember him. But so he actually directed the 3rd one, then he did Upgrade, and then he did this. So I was actually very amazed it wasn't a female director, because it's certainly, like, there are things in the movie.
And it wasn't until you brought up about the political coding, which I was aware of, but I didn't really think about it this way. If you really think about maybe what the message of the Invisible Man is that we should listen to women when they say something wrong. And I don't know why that took me so long to figure that out, but I just realized that now, and I think that's actually quite powerful.
No, I think this is a film that will speak to a lot of people. And also, like,
Harvey Weinstein could be the Invisible Man, basically.
There were scenes in the film that were not about the Invisible Man. Like, so do you remember the job interview scene? So something I thought was odd, and I don't know if you picked up on this, but I thought it was kind of very on point with the theme of the movie, is during the job interview, the guy interviewing her makes like a comment about like, oh, all the beautiful women go to Europe. And I was just like, that is weird and inappropriate.
I would feel uncomfortable in that situation.
I was wondering, because before what happens, I was thinking maybe he was going to be like another bad guy or something. But It's very much throughout the movie. Gaslighting is a big theme. The Invisible Man's goal is not to really kill her, but to make her look crazy.
Just to torture her, basically.
Yeah, he wants her to submit to his will. Like, near the end of the film, it's like, this will all go away if you just have my baby, essentially. And even her closest friends, her sister, police officer who she's staying with, he makes them all think that she's going crazy. And that's kind of why I think at least for me when I was reading the film, I think the horror doesn't really come from the special effects, but it's more of just that feeling of no one believing you. And that's very different from the original. And that's the other thing too, is I don't think that, everyone listening now has grown up with Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Like an invisible effect is not going to surprise anyone. Despite the fact they can do it, I feel like the story has to be really strong.
Actually, talking about it now, I actually think I'm kind of changing my opinion about the movie, because I guess maybe it's because so anytime we see a movie, whether it's together separately, to get to have this be as organic as possible, we don't discuss it at all. And one of the best ways
we don't talk to each other about the movie beforehand.
Yeah. And so that's one of the best ways to kind of flesh out how you feel about things, is to kind of just discuss it. And since we didn't, and now that we're discussing it, I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. This is actually very, very smart in its handling of it. And like I said, with the verdict of the Weinstein trial just recently coming out, with all that going on, if you really think about it, if you think about it in this context, Harvey Weinstein was the Invisible Man of Hollywood.
Yes. As a fan of horror, like I said, I think it's a genre that often goes overlooked as far as powerful messages, and I do think.
Oh yeah, it's a very undervalued genre.
So I think this will speak to a lot of people who might not even be horror fans, so to speak. But another thing I wanted to touch on a little bit was the sci-fi aspect of it, because that was something else that was very different. And I kind of mentioned the magic potion in the first one.
Yeah.
So the way it works in this film is that he has basically a Marvel's Avengers invisible suit.
It kind of reminded me a little bit of the Pink Panther. Wrong franchise, the Black Panther.
I want to see that Pink Panther movie.
the Black Panther.
Yes.
If he had his suit does have a total face covering.
So that was something early on. They're like, oh, he's an expert in optics, and when they said that, I was thinking, what the hell does that mean? That's cameras essentially. Yeah. So
that made total sense to me.
Well,
once I'm smarter.
once I figured out once you see the suit, once you understand how he's doing it, it made perfect sense, because essentially the way the suit works is it's covered in little cameras that project the image around, so you're wearing a suit and it makes you invisible. Smart choice. As much as I like the old movie, it is very dated, and it's it's H.G. Wells. Anyone who's read his old sci-fi, it's still good, but it's very silly the way.
You're right. I don't think this story would have worked if it had been a scientific potion or something, or some kind of thing that he drank that made him invisible. I don't think that would have worked.
Yeah, and War of the Worlds is another example of one where it's a very cool alien invasion book, but there's a lot of the ideas are very outdated. So I thought that was smart. So it's not and it also kind of gives him, with the whole gaslighting aspect of the movie, it's
it's very timely.
It's timely, but it gives him deniability when she's accusing him. So for most of the film, he's faked his death, but for later on when she's trying to it's I've been locked into it anyway. It gives him some deniability, so he can easily. With it wouldn't work with the old film because he was permanently invisible. There's no way to so that was a good idea. And additionally, the other thing I think is very outdated and kind of weakens the evil of the monster, so to speak, is the fact that the magic potion made him crazy in the original. It works, but I think there's something scarier about the person already being a monster. It's almost like giving a super weapon to a violent criminal. The amount of damage they can do is just. So that was something I think was very, very well adapted, because it makes him scarier. If it came out oh, he drank something and it's making him crazy, it kind of takes a lot of the impact
you're right.
out of it.
I kind of wish, looking back at the original Invisible Man, I kind of can agree with you there. I kind of wish they had not been like, oh, he has this ingredient in it. Oh, and that's what makes him weird and crazy.
I think it works for the type of movie the old one is. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have done that, especially it's like H.G. Wells.
Well, yeah, that's the way it's written. But and I guess right. Maybe if I would have now, that's one thing I would take out.
It's part of the as I said, at least for me, the old one has kind of a sillier tone. So having it be a magic potion and all this, it doesn't necessarily ruin the movie. I just think if you were making a new one, you wouldn't want to do that because it would just come off as kind of ridiculous.
And I guess for me, there was actually one of the shows that I'm really into that I've talked about at Castle. There's an episode I guess where some character remember wins the lottery. And there's a line that I've always liked in it. They said that money doesn't change you; it just magnifies who you already are. And I kind of like that as it relates to things like the whole concept of the Invisible Man. If for example, he, like I said, that's one of the things I wish I could have. And I'm not saying it's bad because I could have changed about the originals. I wish it had been more the concept of it wasn't the potion that made him crazy. It was the fact that he was kind of already a gross person, and this just kind of actually just brought it out more. Does that make sense?
I hear you. There's lots of it's one of those things where any old movie you can I often do this with the Star Wars prequels, but it's you try and find ways to it would have been better if you did this and stuff like that.
Here's my hot take. T's favorite Star Wars movie is Episode 1. Come at me.
I don't think you realize what you've done.
No, I know.
But yeah, so as far as I don't like to put things above criticism, but with the old movie, it's so just it's what it is.
Yeah, nothing is above criticism.
For sure, but it's what are you going to do? Remake the... You're late. Yeah, they already remade it.
They've remade it a million times.
The other thing, less about the themes and stuff that I definitely wanted to touch on is the soundtrack was amazing.
See, you and I differ there.
Really? You didn't like it?
So... I don't know if it was the theater that we were in. I don't think it was the theater because I saw a movie in that same theater, a different movie, the next day or later that week, and it wasn't the same issue. It was ridiculously loud. So I don't know if that was just the theater or if that's just the way they mixed the sound. My younger brother, because of the way he processes things, he can't when we go to the movies, he has to put things in his ears because it's too loud for him. I have never had to do that. That's one of the reasons why I was sitting there the whole time for the first 15 minutes until the draft house brought me napkins to stuff in my ears that I just had my fingers just over my ears because it was so loud.
But are you talking about the sound design or the
Maybe
music?
I'm talking about the sound design. The music, I've seen this more recently a lot in horror films. They do kind of that weird, it's that sort of synthy,
and that was something I initially my eyebrows were raised a little bit. But once we got into the story and we realized, the fact he was using essentially an Iron Man suit to accomplish this and stuff, then I was like, oh, you know what? This is actually incredibly appropriate. And I loved. It's funny. It's interesting we differ on this. I felt like the sound design was better than the visuals. Not that the visuals were bad, mind you.
The only thing I have with visual is when we do see him at the end morph back into... Not morph back, but when the invisibility power wears off because he's dead now.
One thing I would definitely give Leigh Whannell props for is, as I said, with an invisibility special effect, it's not going to impress anybody. So on top of the story, the sound, it wasn't too loud for me. Different opinions, but it was
whiskey's weird.
It was scarier here because that was the thing too. They didn't use the invisible effect too much until the end of the movie. So knowing he was there, you could not see him. There was no outline of his body or whatever. So a lot of it was told through the sound design. You would hear stuff off in the distance when she thought that anytime there was a scene where he was messing with her, you would not see what he was doing, but you could hear him.
You could hear him, or what they did, they said they didn't use the invisible effect a lot. One of the things that I liked is, at least towards the beginning of him starting to mess with her, it was more about the fact that stuff is being sent or taken from them without anything. Like, for example, when she goes interviewing, her sketches are all missing, or the email that got sent to her sister. I thought that was a really cool way to kind of update it, because as interesting and unsettling as I found the crazy original Invisible Man, that wouldn't have worked nowadays. It, like you said, would have looked a little more hokey, and so that was kind of a more way to kind of like build it to the point to where they do kind of start using it.
And it's one of those things too, like, speaking of the hokiness of the effect, this is just, honestly, I think the scene had impact. But the scene where he does actually kill her sister, upon future viewings, I could see that getting kind of funny. It's very good. Like, just for anyone who hasn't seen it, essentially he cuts her throat and puts the knife in the female lead's hand.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very quick. It's, and it doesn't like initially look silly, but just kind of
just thinking back in the visual, I can see
that's really honestly the only time I felt that way about the effect. And I didn't think it wasn't intense or scary or had impact or anything. I just think, like, I could see someone turning it into a GIF.
Yeah,
I could see it. There's something. I think it's also kind of the quick editing, because it's like, you see her sister react and you don't know what she's reacting to, and then quickly cut to the knife hovering above her face, big gasp from the audience, throat cut. It's, when you first see the movie, I think it is actually pretty shocking, but it's
shocking, but it's like once it happens it's just like it loses its effect immediately.
And I feel like that's a good example for why it was a smart idea not to use the invisible effect, because it at least not as much throughout like the first 2/3 of the movie, because I feel like it could have gotten goofy. Possibly. Possibly.
I can see that. I really can see that. That scene, to me, I remember looking at that and me and Crime just like, yeah, that wasn't a deep enough cut to kill anybody.
That's what you. I
told you when I had that lighting professor with that not lighting class, that cinematography class, and I argued with him about the blood spatter as opposed to the way the scene was composed.
Ladies and gentlemen, T needs to tell you that story at some point.
Well, I will tell you.
It is this. It explains his personality to a T. It is very.
But that scene in particular, what I do think works about that is it is, you kind of know that he's gonna go after, at some point, members of the family. You don't expect it at that point in the movie. I mean, there was kind of always the idea that he's gonna go after somebody. He's gonna take somebody out. You really don't expect it to, and I think this kind of is a good use of the Invisible Man horror aspect. Like you said, if the effect will get old after a while, but I do think that's what works with it, is that you don't expect it to happen because of the way it's all filmed in a public place in front of all these people, and with the quickness with which it happened. And so I do think that makes that work. However, talking about the sister's death, I'm kind of going to transition to more of the things that kind of a nice jumping off point, the things I really didn't super like about it. One of the things is I don't like, and maybe this has to do, again, I'm not a female or woman, so I can't really speak to this, but everybody seemed too quick to jump to the "you're crazy." They seemed a little quick to jump on that train, and that's kind of. And
I think that was kind of the point.
But so for example, in the
it's kind of like that whole thing of like, oh, women are hysterical,
but even other women were quick. Like her sister was like,
yeah, I agree with that.
She gets this email, and I'm like, oh, if it's like, just speaking of at least my family and my friends, if they suddenly got an email from me saying, oh my God, you suffocate me, I don't want to talk to you, they'd be more concerned about the fact that, like, this is completely out of the blue.
I am in such agreement about that. Later on, when
but the sister makes a big deal about it, and
sister, that made no sense to me. It is established that there was, some fighting about like this guy, and like, she had kind of burned her in the past. I completely agree. The email was a very strange final straw for her sister.
Yeah, it's like,
which I'm like, the thing I did like later, this was better. So like there's a scene where the Invisible Man hits the daughter of the police officer that she's staying with. That made sense. I could buy that because who else would have hit her? You know what I mean? It's like,
I don't know.
I could buy them thinking she's insane because of that, but an email
Well,
like
see that email. Well, the fact that her sister, like I said, if there was previous history, if it's just hint, it wasn't enough. Previous history wasn't acknowledged to really establish, hey, we've had problems in the past or whatever. I mean, the fact that her sister was willing to show up at like some weird deserted road at 3 a.m. tells me that their relationship wasn't that strained.
Yes.
For like at most I could see her sister going, "Hey, was that you that sent that?" Because that was kind of really mean and out of the blue. Not kind of ask, "Ooh, I didn't know you felt that way. Bye, don't talk to me again."
Yeah, it's very there. And to be honest,
if it had been a coworker, I kind of could have bought it a little more.
Also, in the third act, there were a couple of times with the police officers where I was also kind of my disbelief was not suspended. Especially when they find the Invisible Man, quote unquote, like tied up in his house, and he blames the whole thing on his brother. I was like, really, you guys? But like, all of you people who were saying that she is crazy. Now that it's been proven there was an Invisible Man, all of you are going to be like, no, it totally wasn't him. Like, it goes with the message of the movie. The message of the movie, I feel like, is believe women. Like, that is kind of so it goes with that. But yeah, there were a couple of moments.
I actually have a theory about that. So during that whole, not really a battle, I guess when she is fighting the Invisible Man, and he takes out like a whole hallway full of guards. And then I think at some point, because we find out the brother, obviously the brother was involved at some point. And what's interesting to me is I think there is a switch, and I could be wrong. I think there's a switch in who is the Invisible Man during that sequence. And let me explain.
Ooh.
Because if you look at the movie, the guy basically kills all the guards in the hallway when she's trying to get out. That's when after a suit starts malfunctioning, so they start seeing him. So there's a scene where he takes one of the guards' guns, and he makes it look like he's going to shoot him. He just says "bam," and then like walks off, and then shoots him from the back. And then later, when that guard catches him in the parking lot, he shoots him to disable him, and then walks by with the gun. Had the opportunity to execute him, but didn't do it. And to me, that's two completely different characters right there, because that speaks volumes about the two. You know what I'm trying to say? Because to me, it made sense the first time because you leave no witnesses. The second time, I'm like...
Only reason I'm going to disagree with you is because we hear him talk to our protagonist when she's chasing him, trying to shoot him. His like... There's a car with the back open, and he's like right in front of her, and we hear his voice, and we know it's the guy. So that's because that happens right before he walks off. So I think the brother switch actually happens after that whole. I think
we got some character inconsistency
that was him at the police station. I think his brother was the one trying to murder the little girl, because that was in two separate locations. So he gets there before she gets there, which doesn't make sense because she grabs a car and drives off.
To me, I guess the thing that speaks the most credence to, if you buy into which I'm going to bring this up in a minute, if you buy into the idea that it was all the masterminded plot of her ex-husband that she gets away from. The fact that I think, because that's very important, they make a point to show that he has the opportunity to kill this guy and doesn't, and they make they make a point in the hallway to show that he didn't have to kill this guy and does. To me, that shows because if we think about the way they paint both characters, they kind of paint the ex-husband as the more psychotic, controlling, would kill anybody who gets in his way sort of thing, and the younger brother as more of the follower of what this guy's doing, and so to make sense to me, he would disarm that guy and not kill him. And it makes sense to me the other guy would what's the word I'm looking for, would kill but would kill to not leave witnesses. No one gets in his way. To me, those two scenes, because the fact they make a point to show both of those, that shows that there's a complete separation of two characters. Like I said, that could be wrong. It could just be there were some issues with character continuity.
Absolutely. The only reason I am disagreeing is, as I said, or like right before the point you're talking about, we hear that it's his voice. And it's not his brother's voice.
I need to wait till we get like a release of that, like on home media, because I want to go back and I want to compare the voices, because I don't think I could. I would be able to. I would have remembered either brother's voice enough to be able to say clearly, this is this one, this is that one. That's because like if I think about it, if I really really think about it, I'm like there was a guy's voice.
But she said it was his voice.
In that moment, she said that was his voice.
Well, like. She doesn't say it. You know what? Like, give us a few months, everybody. T's gonna come back with just copious amounts of like crazy scribbling.
It took her way too long to figure out. Actually, she figures out quite early. His biggest Achilles heel is that if he's seen, he's gone. I would have been walking around with like a can of spray paint that whole time.
This is how T watches movies, everybody. Like. Any crime or he will have copious notes, and he will just or the murderer was actually this, Or if you're making a movie,
when there's people around, she at one point she does this with the flower in her bedroom by herself, and then kind of just ditches the idea. I would have left it all over the house. I don't know.
If you're making a movie, if your continuity or your art department isn't on point, T is going to have so many conspiracy theories.
I have still not forgotten in No Reservations where in one shot they had money in the middle of the Monopoly board, and then they cut to a different angle and there's no money in the middle of the Monopoly board.
No Reservations, the Anthony Bourdain show?
No Reservations, the movie with Catherine Zeta-Jones and Aaron Eckhart. I saw that on my birthday in 7th grade.
Okay, that makes sense. If it had been Anthony Bourdain's show, I would have been like, dude, it's like a documentary show. They're not.
There's no excuse. Documentaries need continuity for them to be believable.
Oh my god. So what do you think overall about the film? Did you like it? Would you recommend it?
I would recommend it. Gotcha. Talking about it, and what I do like about it is, I have this whole weird thing about violence in movies. It's not overly violent. I talked about that whole guard scene. If you really think about it, most of them, except for I think one, they're basically just unconscious. They're not dead.
Yeah.
And so
at the very, very end, he's definitely...
Well, that's the bad guy, though.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's what... Anyway.
No, I'm talking about the guards in the hospital. I have this whole thing about people just doing their job.
I gotcha.
So it's it's dark, it's gritty, it has a very important message that everybody needs to hear. And we kind of do need to support that message too, even without that message being the reason to support it. It's a solid movie. I've come around to it in the last 45 minutes just talking about it. But yeah, I really liked it. I enjoyed it. Not sure if it's a movie that I would buy for myself. But it's definitely a movie where if I'm flipping through channels, I'd be like, yeah, oh, this was a good movie. This was solid. Or I would show it or if somebody wants to be like, oh, hey, movies that unsettled you. I will admit when I came home, I was a little unsettled because I live by myself. And my building's old. I always have I can sense when a spirit is watching me. I'm not crazy. I totally can sense this. So I was like, oh, great. I'm going to come home and just be freaking out. There's going to be one last thing about that. I do like the fact that when they wanted you to know that he was there, they would kind of just pan and show you just a corner of nothing.
Yeah.
And that was the camera's way of telling you the guy's there. Here, even though nothing's moving, nothing's touching. I love that. But yeah, it is unsettling. It's well made. It's well done. I think if they could get their sound mixing to be less basic, I would give it a high rating. But I enjoyed it. What about you?
I think it's great. I do understand what you mean about loud noises. I thought the sound design was great. I honestly, as someone who's always trying to get people into horror movies, I can't recommend this enough. If you're someone who is thirsting for a strong female character in a film, this is all for that. It's got a great message. It's got a very grim ending. The tone between...
Oh, no, the ending was great. She walks off in that awesome outfit with that smirk and her great hair.
I'm not saying what she did is wrong. I'm saying what she did was grim.
You know, this
The
race.
fact,
Do you remember that documentary I had you watch about that guy in that town that was killed in front of everybody? Same sort of question that they asked on BuzzFeed Unsolved. It's
the point
is the killing is murder okay if it's seemingly justified?
that doesn't make it any less grim.
It's not grim. She's not going to become a murderer. I don't think that was the idea.
I don't think you're. So the point is like.
Clearly, I'm not getting. Go ahead.
No,
I'm not
so
getting what you're
it's
saying.
grim because I'm not gonna explain myself. I think if you're interested enough, you should see the movie, and you can agree or disagree with me about it being a grim ending. I'm not saying what she did was wrong. I'm saying to do what she did is. It's sad that it had to come to that.
Okay, I will admit that's
because the police should have anyway.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, she gives him a chance.
I feel let's not even.
No, well, I just want to say, like you said, it's sad that it didn't have to come to that because if you watch the ending, she does give him the chance to come clean.
That is true.
And admit. So to me that tells me she's still inherently a good person because she does give him the chance.
The definition of grim just means no,
I know, but I'm saying that's actually I think that speaks volumes about her character that she goes in with the whole idea of that she wants to give him the chance to confess to what he did, and then if that happens, he can be arrested and taken away. He doesn't die. He doesn't. She knows he never will, and so I think it's really good. I think it wasn't just like her going and being like, "There's only one thing to do this," and I think that also shows how stable she is too.
Is it my turn?
Okay, yeah, sorry. Good.
All right. So, as I was saying, grim ending, really great performance from Elizabeth Moss.
Mm-hmm. Second that.
Excellent. Only. And good direction from Lee Whannell. And I hope I'm not butchering your name if by some chance you even ever stumble upon this podcast.
Send us an email telling us how to correctly pronounce your name. I'm
very excited to see what he's going to do. And hopefully if this is successful enough that Universal makes sequels, hopefully they can bring on a female director. Because that would have been nice if that had happened. But otherwise... excellent. Probably, like, if I'm being brutally honest, probably not one of my favorites of all time, but for a remake of a classic, you could do a lot worse.
Yeah. It's good. It's solid. Like you said, yeah.
That's about it for Reels on the Rocks.
And that's it for this episode of Whiskey and Sweet Tea. Go ahead and tweet at us.
If you guys liked the show, feel free
if there's something you'd like us to do differently, something you didn't like.
Feel free to keep listening. We already have a movie planned for episode 2. But next episode, we will be asking you guys to tweet at us what we should watch. Just know you guys get to decide what we're watching in the future. Just for the first few episodes, we figured we'd have a plan before we go into that. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, guys, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Have a good one, y'all. The Whiskey and Sweet Tea Show is a production of Audra Christine and La Prince Laboratories. It is edited by Sophia Sabin and produced by Audra Christine, with original artwork by Ace Esparza. Follow us on Twitter at the WAST Show and tweet at us with any topics or movies you'd like us to discuss in the future.